Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to Coffee Chats with Coach Candy. I am Coach Candy, and I am so glad to see you here. Cheers, y'all. It is Thursday morning, and we are getting ready to rock and roll. Good morning, Deborah. Good morning, Herbie. Welcome, everyone. Grab your coffee, grab your tea, grab your water, grab whatever it is that gets you fired up and going in the morning. Good morning, Martha. Let's take a little coffee here while I'm letting everybody jump on. Good morning. Hello. Good morning indeed. So welcome, everybody. Hope you're having a great week. And I want to have a little conversation this morning. I want to see what's on my mug. It says, be a nice human. I don't know if you can see it with the glare on my, can you see that? Be a nice human. I'm going to pour all this caffeine into my body. At least we can start with being a nice human today, right? So it's my reminder every day, be nice. Some days it's easier than others. So I want to get into some conversation. I want to talk a little bit about the difference between satisfaction and fulfillment. And I'm curious, when you hear those two words, what is the difference for you? Do you see a difference? I think there's a huge difference between those two words. And I think some people allow themselves to stay in a place that's satisfied versus maybe one that we want Camp Candy mugs. That is definitely a possibility. I already have Camp Candy t-shirts. I can make Camp Candy mugs. That is absolutely, I will do that for sure. And so let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about what satisfaction is, how you would define that, and what is fulfillment. And is there a difference, and how do you know which space you're in at any given time? And so I want to open that up before I share some thoughts about that. I personally think there's some big differences between feeling satisfied and feeling fulfilled. But for some people, there's not a difference. And so I was just kind of going through some stuff this morning and was like, oh, I think that might be a good question to pose to the group and see where people are at in terms of one over the other. Satisfaction is just okay, where fulfillment is amazingly delightful. Ooh, I might have to borrow that one, Herbie. I love that. Amazingly delightful. I like that. And so when I hear that, that shows up very differently in my body. And I would agree. I think satisfaction is that kind of okay, content, sometimes status quo space, right? We're like, well, I'm satisfied. It's okay. It's where when people walk around, and for anyone that's ever worked with me one-on-one or any of my other groups, you know that there are words that I'm not fans of, not a fan of. One of them being okay, fine, good, especially when I ask people how they're doing. Good morning, Carol. And so I would agree. I think that space of satisfied is one where people let themselves hang out in a place of status quo. I think satisfied is that space where we are like, how are you today? And they're like, I'm good, I'm fine. And there's almost that borderline sometimes of that little Eeyore space, right? Oh, it's good. It's all right. I can't complain. That's that probably is my biggest pet peeve response, just to be wide open and truthful. When somebody says, well, I can't complain, I'm like, that's going to be your response when I say, how are you? How's your day? How are you feeling? They're like, well, I can't complain. Like, that's supposed to be a measure of accomplishment. That's supposed to be some great space to say, I can't complain. It could be worse. I think about the way we respond in that space, right? And meh. Oh, yeah, there's another one. I love that. That's actually got a whole sound with it, right? Meh. Satisfied is I can take it or leave it. Yeah, I think I really agree with that. Thank you, Herbie. I appreciate that. I really agree. It's kind of like that meh. It's got like sound effects and audibles. And if you've ever been around, I remember being in college. And one of my roommates at the time, suite mates, I was living in one of the suites, her boyfriend, whenever you would ask him how he was doing, whatever, he'd grunt. Like, he wouldn't even respond, so he'd be like, ugh. And I just think, about how we choose to show up in that space and how we're responding. And so think about if you are one of those people that is sometimes guilty of the meh, the or the I'm good, I'm fine, I'm okay, I can't complain, things could be worse. think about what you're bringing into your life when you use that kind of language and that energy. And I feel like that space of satisfied is oftentimes a place where people get to cop out. They get to go, well, it could be, to Herbie's point, I can take it or leave it. It could be better, but it could be worse. It's like that non-committal space in your life where you show up and you're like, you're kind of blasé. You're almost in the space where you're allowing life to happen to you instead of you showing up purposely to say, what feeds my soul? So when I think about that amazingly delightful space of fulfillment, I think about that's such a visceral space for me. That's a space where I feel like my soul's on fire, like my heart is connected. I feel like it's the space where I'm overflowing with gratitude and joy. And I can feel it. It resonates. It's when someone says, Candy, how's your day going? And I'm like, it's amazingly delightful. I'm going to have to steal that. I love that. It's amazingly delightful. It's fabulous. It's so incredible. It's electric, it's magical, it's whatever it might be. I feel like those words are opening a path for me to create that fulfillment. And I also think fulfillment is a choice. I think just like, Brendan Burchard will talk about all the time, a generator or a power plant doesn't generate energy. It actually, or a power plant generates energy, it's choosing, it's creating that energy, right? And so when you're in that space of fulfillment, you're creating that space to open up wide so that you can actually have the things that you need to drop in that fill you up. Think about the word full fulfillment, right? It's filling you up full. And when I think about the literal definition of fulfillment, it's filling you up full. And so I think about when you feel like you're full, and think about how different that is from when you feel like, it's all right, or that meh, right? The noise, when you're just like, because that's the other response you get from people. When they're in that satisfied or they're content or they're just like, it could be worse. They just kind of give you the shoulder shrug, like they're like. And so think about your energy in that space, right? Think about when you're like, okay, life's good, it's okay, I got no complaints, I'm just gonna roll with it, versus I'm choosing to open up this conduit, to open up this path, to allow myself to be full, to allow myself to get filled in every way that I'm interacting with people, in every way that I'm showing up. Hello, Karen. And so I want you to think about that. I want you to think about the difference between satisfaction, because oftentimes people are like, oh, I just need to be satisfied with this, right? Is that really the level you want to go, or do you want to take it to the next level and allow yourself to be fulfilled? And I truly think there is a huge difference between the two. I think there is this energetic difference in terms of where you're at. And if you look at that kind of vibration chart, you look at all the different emotions and you look at all the different ways we, feel through things, the vibration of satisfaction is almost, it's at kind of that middle point where it's like, if you actually look at, there's a difference between like content, which I look at satisfaction kind of being in that space of content, and then you start getting into the complaining and whatever, and it's right at the cusp of either going up into the really high vibration, positive, juicy, amazing energy, or sliding down into that spiral. And I think when we're in that space of satisfaction, it allows people to slide. It allows people to become unconscious. It allows people to not take personal responsibility for showing up and bringing the things into their life that is going to generate that power, generate that energy, fill them up so that they're full or overflowing. And I think about that space of fulfillment. That's the space where you're, and only you can decide what that is. It looks different for everybody. Fulfillment is a very personal, it's very different, I think, and often a very spiritual experience. It is a space where you are full or overflowing. And so there are days, I have days where the gratitude is so full, or the love or the joy, that it's like, this is fulfillment. This is when you're like, you can feel it in your body. Everything's like just kind of firing up, and your whole body is engaged with it, versus think about what you feel when you're in that space of satisfaction. So I'd love to hear from some of the rest of you that are on. What are your thoughts about the difference between satisfaction and fulfillment? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you see it as being something different? I want to have a little conversation this morning. So tell me what you're thinking. Love to hear some other thoughts. Do you agree with that? Do you agree that satisfaction is more of this blasé, kind of content, status quo, non-committal? That's the other thing I feel that satisfaction can be oftentimes. It's this non-committal space versus fulfillment, which is I'm all in. Like there's an ownership, there's an action, there's an effort, there's something you need to do in order to make that happen. You don't just get to sit still and say, I'm just gonna let life happen to me and wait and see what shows up, and I might get fulfilled and maybe not. I think there's an actual deliberate or intentional way we show up in order to bring fulfillment to us. And so I think that's a different, people can be very satisfied, very complacent, very content, very okay in their life, or people can go out and have this like voracious hunger, this visceral space that they feel needs to be filled, and they go out seeking, they truly go out looking to suck the marrow out of life, right? I look at fulfillment being in that space of truly being able to suck out the marrow of life and be able to taste it with all of your senses, right? It's engaging your whole presence. And I think about the other day, we talked about the difference between listening and hearing. And I think it's the same kind of thing. Hearing is that headspace, right? It's that two-dimensional headspace. You're not fully engaged in that. You're listening to words. And oftentimes you're filtering it with your own agenda, your own biases, your own beliefs. Listening is an open heart space. Listening is an open vulnerability space. Listening is a 3- and 4-dimensional space of energetic movement and vibration. And I think about satisfaction being more of that, okay, 2-dimensional headspace versus that fulfillment being a really wide open heart space, right? It's that very active, very engaged, very present, because I truly feel, I can speak sometimes, I truly feel that to have fulfillment, you have to be actively present and engaged in your life in order to actually receive it, in order to know that it's filling you up, to know that it's creating this space that's connecting to your senses, to your heart, to your soul. And I apologize when you hear the background noise. I had a big old cement truck or whatever that just pulled up. So fantastic. So anyway, curious, what are some of the other thoughts? Herbie, there is a space for satisfaction when you really don't care. Example, choosing where to go for dinner. The other side is that you can't complain about where you go to eat. Absolutely. And there is a space. I absolutely agree with that. There is a space for satisfaction. You don't need to feel fulfilled in every aspect of your life. It's also why you don't need to be present in every aspect of your life. You would wear yourself out. We only need to be present on those things that are really meaningful for us. Other things, there's things we do that are automated responses. There's things that we do that need to get done that are just ways that we cohabitate in this existence of life. And so I think that there's a lot of validity to that there are things that you can be satisfied if it's not something that you really don't care either way, such as I really don't care what we go to eat. I'm hungry and I'll eat anything. I'm like, there's very few places I won't eat, and I can find something I want on any menu. And if I'm in a space where that's just not real meaningful for me, I just need to eat, I'm going to say I don't care. And to Herbie's point, then you can't complain or voice an opinion. And so think about where there's people showing up that are claiming they're satisfied or claiming up and showing up in that space of being half-assed. And then they complain about the outcome on the other side. I think about people that when it comes to politics or something like, well, I didn't think I had to vote. It doesn't really matter. They create that kind of blase. And then they complain about the aftermath. And I'm like, you don't get to complain when you didn't participate. And so to that point, when you're okay with something being what it is, and you're like, or you believe that you don't have any kind of influence or impact in that, you choose to not engage with it, then you don't get to have an opinion or a voice about it afterwards. It's when you choose to step up to say, there's something in this for me, there's something in this that I want to make sure I'm either contributing to and or receiving back. That's a different game. And it's okay. There is a space for satisfaction in your life. There's several things. I mean, I tend to be on the other extreme where I'm passionate about everything, and that's okay too. And the spaces, there's a few things that people ask me, well, I want your opinion. I'm like, I honestly don't have an opinion. This is not something I spend any time thinking about. Really doesn't matter to me. I'm more concerned with us hanging out. I don't care what we do. And I really truly mean that, because I'm just satisfied. I'm being fulfilled by the space of the environment I'm in with the people I'm in. I don't need it to be necessarily the activity that fulfills me. And so there's examples of that, right? Where it's okay to be in a place of satisfaction. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm not saying that satisfaction is bad at all. There's absolutely a space for it. I just want you to know, can you recognize the difference? Are you standing in a place where you say, these are things I'm satisfied, or are you saying this is what fulfills me, when really that's not the case? Because that fulfillment has a more energetic pull. It has something that drops in, and usually there's a more visceral, sensory kind of connection to that, where you can feel it sometimes. You can feel the tingling. You can feel the energetic pulse on your body, right? So just absolutely, just something to consider. It was something that as I was going through some things this morning, I'm just curious, because we throw words around a lot, and sometimes I wonder if we actually settle in to think about what their meaning is, and particularly what their meaning is for us. And again, you may challenge, you may disagree with what I'm saying this morning, which is perfectly okay. I'm asking the question because it was something for me that I was like, I'm kind of curious. What would people think is the definition between satisfaction and fulfillment? Because sometimes I think we use them interchangeably, and I personally think they're very different. For me, they have a very different energetic footprint. When I hear them, when I feel them into my body, when I think about how they resonate in my life. And even in this conversation, I'm being reminded of, I want to be more purposeful about how I choose to use either word in the space that they're in, to make sure that I'm really asking for what I want in that space. Am I just looking to be satisfied in that space, or am I truly looking to be fulfilled? And so I want you to think about that. I want you to think about, as we go through some of these things, where they show up for you, and where they resonate, and, is there a difference in how they play out in your own life? Hello, Dina. And so the other thing I wanted to throw out there this morning, as we're talking about kind of the difference between satisfaction and fulfillment, I've had some people, some of my peeps out on the West Coast who, when I do this at 7:30 in the morning, it's way too early for them. It's 5:30. And so a lot of them are not here being able to participate in these conversations. And so I'm starting to think about, oh wait, before I do that, Martha, there are synonyms for me. They are synonyms for me. Beyond those would be delighted, thrilled, and joyful. So interesting. So where Herbie and I are saying that they are very different, satisfaction and fulfillment have a very different connotation, have a very different energetic footprint, have different meanings. Martha's saying that they are synonyms for her. And so she also would include words like delighted, thrilled, and joyful. And that's why I'm asking the question, because I know for some people those words are interchangeable. For me, the word satisfaction and the word fulfillment have very different meanings. Now, for Martha, and I appreciate that you're putting that out there, Martha, thank you, they mean similar things. She puts them in the same space. She's saying that they're synonyms for each other. And so this is why I asked the question, because here's the thing. There is not a right or wrong in this space. There's not a right or wrong in most of the spaces that I bring up. And there's a lot of different perspectives and different ways to look at this. Good morning, Michelle. And so I want you to think about that for a moment, because it's not about whether or not I agree with you, or whether or not I'm posing a different perspective in terms of how I look at any given terms, or we define things, or anything else. It's a matter of what resonates for you. And one of the things that I'm trying to challenge you in, or invite you to do, is get clear about the language that you're using, and be more intentional about, is that what you intend to say? Is that really the meaning of what you want to put out? Or are you getting lazy in the way that you show up and you speak? And so a lot of times we spew words, we say things because they're socially acceptable, and truthfully they might have a different meaning for us. And so a lot of times when I put things out there like this, when it's like, what's the difference between there? Is there a difference? How would you define that? What does that look like for you? It's because I want you to think. I want you to think for yourself. I want you to get into a space to say, if I were to really define that, what does that mean to me? Does that mean the same thing it means for everybody else? Because here's the thing, even when we get into communications, even when we're in our interactive relationships, we're engaged with other people, we don't take time oftentimes to sit down and say, wait a minute, the whole reason why we might be at an impasse is because you're thinking this means one thing and I'm thinking this means another thing. And if we would just take 5 seconds to clarify, how do you define that versus how do I define that? Holy cow, we could solve a lot of the problems that show up. What happens is we make an assumption that someone else thinks the same way we do, has the same perspective and is defining that. And then when we can't understand where they're not on the same page with us, it's because they're coming at it from a different experience, a different filter. And for those of you that have ever been to my events, which by the way, I've got one coming up in October, a 2-day event. But if you've been to my 2 or 3 day events, you know that we have places inside the event where I'll hit pause because there'll be questions about words. And it might be words like this, like, Candy, what's the definition between satisfaction and fulfillment? And oftentimes I'll pause and I'll say, you know what, that's a really good question. Let's talk about it. How would you define that? And so before I put my thoughts into the arena, I then ask everybody in the room, I'm like, so tell me, do you think, first of all, how would you define those words? Are they different? Are they the same? And then what we do is, even if there's different opinions, even if there's different ideas, what we do is we bring the collective consensus of what the majority of the room is engaged in terms of how they view that word, how they define that word. And what we do is we get agreement, not groupthink, agreement around, in the context for the rest of this event, for the rest of this training, can we agree that we're going to define these words as such so that we all can be on the same page to move forward to do the work that we're going to do over the next 2 days. That is one of the most powerful leadership tools I can share with you, is that when you sense, and even before you sense, when you are starting to make an assumption that you think someone else believes that what you say is the same thing that you're saying, pause and get clarification. Pause and validate if you're on the same page. And if not, then come to a place where you can agree to define something a certain way for the context of what you're having in that conversation. Does that make sense for everybody? Because that's a really powerful leadership tool. So for Martha, satisfied equals fulfilled equals content. So for her, those words are synonymous. For Herbie and I, as we were just talking about, they're not. And so that right there would be an opportunity for us to say, so if Martha and I were in conversation, rather than being like, oh, Martha doesn't think what I think, how dare she? It's to say, okay, how do we come to an agreement for whatever the container is that we're having this conversation in? How do we get to a point where we say, could we look at a little nuance that satisfied might mean more of this and fulfillment might mean more of this? And we would talk through that and get to a place where both of us were like, okay, I can live with that. I can be comfortable with that in this container. And it's always important that when you're having this conversation, that when you're having that difference of opinion, that difference in terms of how words are defined, is that you have agreement for the container that you're setting. It's not that forever Martha and I are going to be like, okay, we always know that this means this and this. No, for what we're trying to accomplish, we would come to a place where we would say, okay, could I give a little here? And let's see, could we meet somewhere where maybe there's a balance between me thinking they're entirely separate and Martha thinking they're very much the same? Is there a way that we could give some variation or nuance where it doesn't have to be the extremes, but it's something that we could come to for agreement in the middle? Hopefully that makes sense for you guys, because this is truly a powerful leadership tool that most people miss. Most people do not hit the pause to have a conversation to make sure there's a grounding and that there's a container set for the rest of the conversation so that everybody feels like they're being seen and heard, that they have an opinion that's on the table, and that there is a safe space for everybody to engage in the conversation. So I know that went a little sideways to a different place, and opportunity to do a teaching moment around a very powerful leadership word. Morning, yes, and articulating that, let's see, Herbie, and articulating that to those to whom are in the conversation so we're all on the same page. Absolutely, it's so powerful. And I get people like, I don't have time for that. Really? I'm gonna tell you, taking 5 minutes, and most 5-10 minutes, taking 5-10 minutes to level set, to make sure there's agreement, not groupthink, agreement. And agreement means everybody's had an opportunity to feel like they were seen, heard, valued, respected, not just nodding the head because you're fearful of putting your opinion on the table. That's groupthink. There's two, they are absolutely two different things. But agreement, where everybody feels like they had a voice in the conversation, taking that additional time up front will save you weeks and months and years of headaches later on. Because when you have to go back and fix something because you realize, holy crap, that person was looking at it from this filter and I was looking at it from this filter, the cleanup is painful. I want you to be more proactive and invest the time up front to make sure that there's a level setting, make sure that there's a framework, make sure that the container has been set. That's leadership versus, well, I don't really have time. I don't want to do this. We just got to move forward. It will cost you more later. I assure you. It's one of the biggest problems in corporate. In my honest opinion, from the 20 years I spent there and all the work I do now, the biggest breakdown in communication is this example right here. It's the, I don't have time. We're just going to power through. And you know what? Get on board or get off. And that whole mentality, that drive mentality, that's like, you know what? You're either on or you're off. Too bad. Everybody in agreement? Good. Let's go. And they don't take the time to really make sure everybody's in agreement. Man, it costs organizations millions of dollars because of the train wreck that happens on the back end. Is absolutely disastrous. And it's inevitable in most cases. It's amazing working with clients, I'm gonna level set. I wanna know when you say this, what do you really mean? And again, for those of you that have worked with me one-on-one, even when we do the life script, I'm like, so let's take a pause. Help me understand, you've said that word a couple times. What does that mean for you? Because sometimes I think people use a word because it's a word they're just used to, or it's a safe word, or it's something, or it's socially accepted, and they haven't really thought into, is that the word I really want showing up in my life? Especially when we talk about things like abundance and financial freedom and that, man, there's a whole lot inside of there that only when you get super clear for yourself can you start attracting the things that you want most. So let's see, Herbie, like the word truck. Explain that to me, because my brain just went all over the place when I see that, like the word truck. So I want you to explain that to me. So let's see, Martha, overflowing, overjoyed, beyond blessed are satisfied and fulfilled. So I love that these words are synonymous for you. It is probably a cultural and generational difference. Provides opportunity for discussion and for diversity and inclusion. Absolutely. Because you also get that. I remember, and here's a story, for example, of don't make assumptions. So my family's from Philadelphia originally. My dad was military. I was born in San Antonio, but I spent a lot of time in between all of our moves. I lived in Italy. I lived all over the world, all over the US, whatever. But my family, both my parents are from Philadelphia. So home base has always been Philly for me. And I grew up more with more influence from my dad's family, which is a bunch of Italians, Philadelphians, Philly, whatever. They got a whole different kind of language out there. So I remember when my dad got stationed at Chanute Air Force Base in Rantoul, Illinois. And oh, worlds of difference. I mean, Philly to rural Illinois is like, I don't even know what kind of stratosphere difference that is. It's two different languages. It's absolutely crazy how different culturally some of the things are. And so, for example, I went over to my friend's house. I was in, I don't know, 6th grade, maybe 6th or 7th grade. And I was going over to my friend's house who lived in Thomasboro. And she comes in and she's like, do you want a pop? And me, who had a lot, I know I say that, some of you are going to laugh, still do, had a lot of attitude. I stepped back and I was like, excuse me, what? She goes, do you want to pop? And I said, you pop me, I'm going to knock you into next week. And she looked completely stunned. Like, what did she just say? And she goes, what? And I go, you pop me, I'm going to pop you into next week. Because for me, on the East Coast, the word pop meant one of two things. It meant your dad. So some people were like, hey, pops. But it was more pops than, or they'd say my pop. They'd say my pops or my pop. And like my grandfather's name was Pop Pop. We called him. He was like Pop-Pop. He was the senior pop. And pop meant, man, I'm going to knock you into next week. It literally is what it means on the East Coast. Well, I had no idea that pop meant soda in the Midwest, in Illinois. Completely foreign to me. Soda means soda in the East Coast. Soda down south is a Coke. Everything's a Coke, a regular Coke or a white Coke. Go to Atlanta and they'll be like, you want a Coke? You want a white Coke? It's crazy. And when you don't understand that, that there's different ways that people have experiences, that there's different cultures, that there's different filters, I was ready to fight. I was ready. And she's like, I just wanted to know if you wanted a Pepsi. And I'm like, and by the way, I'm not a Pepsi girl. I don't drink any soda anymore. But if you're going to give me something, you're going to give me a Diet Coke. But she was like, I just wanted to know if you wanted a Coke. And I'm like, oh, a soda. I'm like, what did you call it? And it was one of the like first times in my life that it was really clear to me how powerful this conversation is, how powerful it is to not make assumptions that when someone says something, they have the same definition or meaning that you do. And so to Martha's point, it's an opportunity. People talk about diversity and inclusion all the time, especially in business. And I will tell you that 85, 90% of the time, it's not happening. And that number might even be higher. They talk a good game, they recruit different, and then expect everybody to be the same, and they have the same language that they've always had, and they're not leaning in to learn cultural differences, to learn gender differences, to learn geographical differences. It's amazing to me how people think, oh, you're Candy, you're a white woman, you want this. Like, interesting, you never asked me what I want. And by the way, things that I wanted in my 20s are not things I want in my mid-40s. And so to know that our definitions change, because here's the other thing I want you to realize. Most of us, and I'm going to get into some things about human design later on, but most of us, 70% of the world is manifesting generators or generators, which means their mind, their headspace is an open space where they're influenced and they have like different perspectives and they can see things from different angles, which means you can change your opinions about things. People get really kind of wired and wound up when they'll say, well, what do you believe? I'm like, well, I could believe this and I could believe that. And it goes back to that says for me, I'm satisfied either way. I can argue things from different perspectives. At one point I looked at going to law school. I took my LSAT because I truly can look at almost any situation, any conversation, anything, and look at it from multiple perspectives, and not just this perspective, that one, but like a whole spectrum. It is one of my gifts. I really, truly, there are very few things I get really locked in and I'm like, this is my belief, this is where I'm at. Now those things are my guiding compass, they're my GPS, they are my moral code. And I usually, and I've had people that have challenged me when I post things on Facebook, I'm like, sure, I can believe that too. I was just posting a question just like this. I'm not saying it's got to be either way. I'm asking the question so that we can have, and I love that there's a difference between what we think, right? And some of it might be generational, some of it might be cultural, some of it might be geographical, some of it might just be based on experiences you had in your family. I mean, we all have words that are trigger words for us based on how parents or things or other circumstantial stuff showed up for us. So I love this. I love the way you guys engage in these conversations. Herbie, you covered it. What do you think of when I say truck? I guarantee that everyone will have a different image of a truck in his or her head. It's not until you pause and chat about the context of the word truck and agree on a term for engagement that you can move forward. Well, and it's interesting because I actually have probably 12 things that showed up for truck. Because again, I can see different perspectives. I'd be like, ooh, it could be a word like I'm gonna truck forward, or it could be like a semi, or it could be a, John Deere, tractor. It could be a truck like my old truck, which was an S10, extended cab. Yeah, or a truck, Ford 250 turbo, diesel, 4x4, right? I have like so many, or monster truck, right? Or man, I'm just trucking along, or whatever it is. First of all, that's one of the challenges with the English language. When I lived in Italy, I taught my neighbor to speak English and he taught me to speak Italian. Let me tell you, it was far easier for me to learn Italian than teaching him English, because most languages, everything has rules. There's one word to describe exactly what you want to describe, and then they have few exceptions. The English language is a bunch of slang and a lot of exceptions, and there's very few rules that are consistent. And so it's really challenging to teach someone our language versus learn another language. So yes, a simple word where most of us are like even I asked, why would you ask the question about truck when there's probably 50 variations of what would come up for people depending on how you look at that word. Great to see here. You have to get the little one dressed. Have a great day. You too, Michelle. So glad you joined us this morning. Deborah, seeing things from a different perspective was one of the things my ex didn't like about me. And probably why he's no longer in the picture, right? Because when you have somebody who doesn't understand that, you have multiple perspectives. It's also a difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. When you understand that your perspective is not the only perspective, it doesn't mean it has to change your opinion or your definition of how you look at something. It can be, and I absolutely agree, Deborah, I see seeing a different perspective as a gift, and I also see it as being a growth mindset. I see when you can understand that someone's coming from a different perspective and you can honor and respect them in that space, even if you have a very clear conviction and you absolutely know that that's not the way you see that, and you're willing to have compassion and understanding that they do, you have a different kind of conversation. You show up from a leadership perspective, and you can raise the level of conversation and consciousness in that moment because you're open to the fact that while this is something I believe to my core, I also know that my truth doesn't necessarily mean it's someone else's truth. And that is one of the most powerful things you can drop into as a leader, is recognizing that your truth is not necessarily someone else's truth, and that's okay, and it doesn't make either one of you wrong. It makes you coming from different perspectives. Me being right doesn't mean you have to be wrong. There is a spectrum of truth, of right, and I think it's interesting when people are like, that's the truth. Like it's a done deal, non-negotiable. I'm like, truth is the most subjective thing we have around us because it's all based on our filters and our experience, and it's based on how we perceive the world, and that all comes from our conditioning, what we've heard, what we've seen, what we've learned. And even people in the same family, my sister and I struggle with this sometimes. We have a different perspective. I was the oldest, she was the youngest. Our relationship with my dad was very different. Our relationship with our mom was very different. So that influences things we believe and things we say, and we have to take time. Really, even in your family, you have to take time and make sure that you're both coming from the same page, or that you can agree to the container that you're going to work with moving forward. All right, so let's see, Deborah, my 350 was my car. It most definitely a truck, right? Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, Shirley. So I want you to think about that. Perspective is power, right? And again, I'm going to quote Trent Shelton when I say perspective can be your power or it can be your prison. And it depends on whether or not you choose to be in a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. And if you want to believe that your opinion is the only opinion that's out there, you're probably going to be really limited to what you experience in the world, who you surround yourself with, and the level of conversation and leadership that you're going to actually entertain in your life. If you're willing to believe that there are other opinions out there and that your truth is not the only truth, and your truth might be your truth right now, and it can also be a different truth tomorrow, because one of the biggest things that stops people from further enlightenment is their previous enlightenment. So it's the space that awakens you to get here oftentimes can get in the way of your next awakening or your next enlightenment, because just because it was your truth to help you get here doesn't mean you're not going to learn some new things. I've changed my opinions about things over the years. Have you ever changed your opinion about something because more information came to you, you had different experiences? That is a growth mindset. When you're open to know that this is my truth right now, and yeah, I do believe that maybe it's not 100% true. I do believe there might be something else I'm missing. I know that I'm coming at it from my lens, and that in itself is myopic. Regardless of, and it's like when people say, I want an unbiased opinion. That's never going to happen, because every single thing on this planet that's breathing in any capacity, that has energy, which by the way, even inanimate objects, everything has energy. If it has energy, it has bias, because it has a relationship to other energies around it. A tree is biased. A dog is biased. They have experiences and filters as well. There is no such thing. And when you understand that at a deep level, you understand that there's very few things that are an absolute truth. Very few things in this world that are an absolute truth, because everything's open to interpretation. Everything's open to experience. Everything's open to a different perspective and a different way to approach it. And so I want you to think about that. I want you to think about how to use those tools, how to pause, how to have the conversation like we did this morning. And I completely respect that Herbie has one definition, and Deborah has a definition, and Martha has a definition, and Carol and Shirley and everybody else that's on here. And it doesn't make anybody wrong, and it doesn't make anybody right. It just is how you look at the world, and it is part of your internal gauge and compass for how you navigate your own leadership. And the only space that's the same for all is that we all have a responsibility to own what we choose to believe, think, expect, say, and do in that space. And so Awesome. I love this conversation. Thank you all for participating. Oh, and what I was going to say is one of the things I'm considering, and so would love some feedback, so think about this, I haven't made a decision, is potentially changing our time for the coffee chats, because like I said, I have a lot of people on the West Coast who want to be engaged in the conversation, who want to join, and 5:30 is just way too early for them, and I get it. Even if they're getting up at 5:30 to jump on a Facebook right away is not in alignment with how they start their morning routine. So trying to look at what might be a more universally open time. So stay tuned. If you have some thoughts on that, I would love to hear it. But I am starting to think about, does there need to be a different time so that we can access more people into this conversation? Because I want to be helpful to as many people as possible. And I think, and I know the power of these conversations, and I want to make sure that people have the opportunity, if it speaks to them, to join us and be part of what we're doing here. So for now, I will see you all tomorrow at 7:30 a.m. On a Friday. And between now and then, go out and have an amazingly purposeful and intentional day, and be mindful about what you say and if it's what you really mean and put out in the world, and take time to understand what other people are, where they're coming from as well. So with that, everybody, I love you big. Good morning, Mateo. Hope you I hope you all have a phenomenal Thursday. With that, I will see you all tomorrow. Bye.